The footage lasted 43 seconds. A uniformed police officer had a young woman pressed against the hood of his cruiser. Her scrubs twisted in his fist, her face turned sideways against the metal, a stethoscope dangling from her neck. The hospital parking lot was full. People watched from the sidewalk, from car windows, from the ER entrance with clipboards frozen in their hands. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. The officer said something close to her ear. She didn't fight back, didn't cry. Just stood completely still, hands flat against the warm hood, eyes fixed on something in the middle distance, like she was somewhere else entirely. 20 minutes later, 4 black military vehicles rolled into that same parking lot. Soldiers in tactical gear hit the pavement before the engines cut. Their team leader walked straight past the officer, past the hospital administrator who'd come outside to manage the situation, and stopped in front of the charge nurse at the door. "We're looking for someone," he said. "Sergeant First Class Ava Calloway. Where is she?" If this story already has you leaning forward, stay right here. Subscribe if you haven't, hit like, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this one travels. The morning had started the way most mornings started at Hargrove Memorial, loud, understaffed, and running on the wrong side of a 20-minute delay. Ava Calloway clocked in at 6:48, 12 minutes before her shift technically began, because she'd learned years ago that 12 minutes could be the difference between a controlled handoff and walking into a disaster blind. She grabbed the charge board from the outgoing night nurse, an exhausted woman named Petra who hadn't sat down in 7 hours, and did a fast scan of the overnight admits. 2 chest pains in bay 3 and 4, 1 cleared, 1 still pending labs. A laceration in bay 7 that had required stitches and a social work consult. A diabetic crash in bay 9 who'd stabilized around 3 a.m. 4 beds open. Waiting room, according to Petra's handwritten note at the bottom of the board, currently holding 11 people, 2 of whom had been there since midnight. "Anything I need to know?" Ava asked. Petra was pulling on her coat. Bay 6 is a veteran, 62, presenting with what looks like a dislocated shoulder, but he's been waiting since 5:15 and keeps saying it's fine and trying to leave. He's not fine. Got it. Also, Mathers is on today. Ava didn't look up from the board. I know. He's already in a mood. Something about the scheduling. He's always in a mood about the scheduling. Petra gave her a look that communicated both sympathy and relief that it was no longer her problem, and walked out. Ava set the board down, rolled her sleeves to the elbow, and went to check on the veteran in Bay 6. Hargrove Memorial sat at the edge of Callum City, not the prosperous edge with the new development and the coffee shops that charged $8 for something served in a mason jar, but the working edge, where the roads had potholes that the city kept promising to fix, and the neighborhood was a patchwork of light industry, old residential blocks, and 2 competing urgent care clinics that sent the cases they couldn't handle to the ER. The hospital was a level 2 trauma center, which meant it got the serious cases without always having the serious resources. The staff made it work. Most of them had been doing it for years. Ava had been at Hargrove for 3 years. Before that, a year of civilian nursing at a hospital in the next state. Before that, 8 years she didn't talk about. She was 33. She wore her hair pulled back tight, moved through the department at a pace that looked unhurried but covered ground fast, and had the kind of stillness in a crisis that other nurses noticed and didn't quite know how to categorize. She was competent in a way that didn't announce itself. She didn't post about work on social media. She didn't go to the hospital happy hours. She showed up, did the work, and went home. Her supervisor, Charge Nurse Director Mathers, had written lax initiative in team-building contexts on her last evaluation, which was the kind of thing someone wrote when they couldn't find anything substantive to criticize. The veteran in Bay 6 was named Gerald Oakes. He was sitting up on the gurney with his right arm cradled against his chest, face tight with the specific expression of a man who had decided pain was not a legitimate reason to inconvenience anyone. "Mr. Oakes," Ava said. "I'm Ava. I'm going to take a look at your shoulder." "It's fine," he said. She stood beside him, did a visual assessment. The way the arm was positioned, the elevation of the right shoulder compared to the left, the faint sheen of sweat at his temple. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon. I figured it would work itself out." He looked at her. "Yeah." And it didn't. It's better than it was. Mr. Oakes, your shoulder is dislocated. It's not going to work itself out. What's your pain level right now? A pause. 4. Try again. Another pause. 6. Maybe 7. Okay, I'm going to get you something for the pain. We'll get imaging to confirm, and then we'll get it back in place. The whole thing takes about 40 minutes. After that, you'll feel significantly better than you do right now. Does that work? He studied her for a moment. You sound like you've done this before. Once or twice, she said, and went to put the orders in. By 9:15, the ER had moved into its mid-morning rhythm, not the frantic pace of a true surge, but busy enough that everyone was in motion. Ava was managing 4 active patients, monitoring 2 more, and had just resolved a billing dispute on behalf of a 60-year-old woman who'd been told incorrectly that her insurance didn't cover the IV antibiotics she needed. She was at the nursing station entering notes when she heard the automatic doors. She didn't look up right away. People came through those doors constantly, but the sound that followed, the specific clip of boots on linoleum moving too fast, too deliberate, made her glance up. The man who walked in wore a uniform. Callum City Police Department. He was broad-shouldered, somewhere in his mid-40s, with the practiced authority of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He went straight to the admissions window, bypassed the woman standing there, and said to the clerk behind the glass, "I need someone in charge, now." The clerk, a young man named Darius, who had developed excellent survival instincts over 2 years at that window, pressed his call button and said, "I'll get someone for you right away, sir." Ava was already moving. "Officer," she said as she reached the window. "I'm Ava Calloway. I'm the charge nurse this morning. Can I help you?" He turned. The name tag read Sloan. He looked at her the way some people looked at a door they expected to open automatically, with mild impatience that it hadn't yet. "I need a patient seen immediately. Walter Greer. He's outside." "Is Mr. Greer in acute distress?" "He's a personal friend of the hospital director. He needs to be seen now." "I understand. If he's in acute distress, chest pain, difficulty breathing, signs of stroke, we'll see him immediately. Otherwise, our triage nurse will assess him, and he'll be placed in the queue based on medical urgency." Sloane's expression shifted slightly. Not anger yet, just recalibration. "Did you hear what I said? He's a personal friend of Director Holt." "I heard you. I'm explaining how triage works. It applies to everyone." She kept her voice even. "If you'd like to bring him in, I can have someone assess him right now." "I don't think you understand the situation." "I think I do." She held his gaze. "We have patients who've been waiting since 5 this morning. A 62-year-old with a dislocated shoulder, a woman with a blood pressure of 178/112. 2 people in visible pain. I can't move someone to the front of that line because of who they know. I'm sorry." Something went cold in Sloane's eyes. He leaned slightly forward. "You're going to want to reconsider that." "Officer Sloane," her voice stayed exactly the same. "I'm not being difficult. I'm doing my job. If you'd like to speak with Director Holt directly, I can get you his assistant's number." She turned and walked back to the nursing station. Sloane did not leave. He stood at the entrance for another few minutes, made a phone call with his back partially turned, and then went outside. Ava logged the interaction in her notes. She always logged interactions like that, had been doing it for 3 years, and went back to her patients. The morning moved forward. Gerald Oakes's shoulder was successfully reduced. The woman with the elevated blood pressure turned out to be having a hypertensive crisis and was moved to a monitored bed. A child with a foreign object in his ear was handled efficiently by the attending with minimal drama. The waiting room ticked down from 11 to 6. At 10:40, Nursing Director Mathers appeared at the station. She'd known it was coming. The only question had been how long. "My office," he said. She followed him down the hall, through the door he held open with an expression that communicated this was not a courtesy but a containment strategy, and stood across from his desk while he settled into his chair. "I had a call from Director Holt," he said. "I assumed." He wasn't happy. "I followed triage protocol, Director Mathers." "Walter Greer is a significant donor to this hospital. He contributes to the foundation annually. He has a relationship with this institution going back 20 years. That doesn't change how triage works. Ava. Mathers folded his hands on the desk in the way he did when he was trying to sound reasonable. There's a way to handle these situations that maintains the protocol and also maintains relationships. You could have found a way to move things along. I offered to have him assessed immediately. Officer Sloan declined because he wanted front-of-line placement regardless of medical status. That's not something I can offer. I'm not saying you were wrong on the policy. He paused. I'm saying you were rigid in the execution. She looked at him. A 62-year-old veteran was waiting in pain. A woman was in hypertensive crisis. If I had moved Greer ahead of them and something had happened to one of them in the meantime, what would you be saying to me in this office? Mathers said nothing. I'll ask again, she said. What would you be saying? That's not the situation we're dealing with. No. We're dealing with the situation where I followed the protocol correctly and a police officer didn't like it. She kept her voice level. I'd like to get back to my patients. He studied her for a moment. Officer Sloan has filed a formal complaint. He's claiming you were obstructive and disrespectful. I have the interaction logged, timestamps included. I'm not doubting your documentation. He shifted. But given the complaint, and given Director Holt's call, I'm going to need to pull you from the floor for the remainder of the shift while HR reviews. The room went quiet. Ava held still. She was good at that, holding still when everything in her wanted to move. You're suspending me. It's a precautionary review. It's standard procedure when a formal complaint is filed. You know this complaint is retaliatory. I know a complaint was filed. HR will sort it out. He picked up his pen, clicked it once. You can collect your things from the locker room. Someone will be in touch by end of week. She didn't argue. That was the thing people who watched would probably remember. She didn't argue. She went to the locker room, changed out of her scrubs, put on the jeans and gray long sleeves she'd worn in, folded her badge into her bag instead of clipping it to her shirt, and walked out the staff exit into the parking lot. The late morning air was cool and slightly damp, the sky the particular washed-out white of a day that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. She stood for a moment by her car, keys in hand, and let herself feel what she actually felt, which was not rage exactly, more like a kind of heavy, familiar weight. The specific exhaustion of being right in a situation where being right didn't protect you. She had felt this before, in other contexts under far worse conditions. She knew what to do with it. She put the keys back in her pocket and walked to the bench at the far end of the parking lot instead of getting in the car. She needed 5 minutes. Just 5. She'd been sitting there for maybe 3 when the cruiser pulled in. Sloan. He parked 2 spots from the staff exit, saw her immediately, and walked toward her with the energy of a man who'd already won and wanted to make sure the other party understood it. Heading home? He said. She looked at him. Looks like it. That's too bad. He stopped a few feet away. There was something in his posture, not quite threatening, but oriented in that direction. You know, this could have been simple. You just had to make it complicated. I followed protocol. You embarrassed a man in front of his officer, in a public space. That's not protocol. That's an attitude problem. I told him how triage works. That's not an attitude. Sloan took a step closer. His voice dropped just enough to become something different. You think your little documentation is going to matter? Holt runs this hospital. I've been on the force in this city for 17 years. You're a nurse. He said the word like it settled something. You're nobody here. She held eye contact, didn't move back. You should walk away, she said quietly. He laughed, a short, dismissive sound, and then his hand came out and grabbed her arm above the elbow, steering her toward the edge of the lot where the cruiser was parked. Not violent enough to be undeniable, just enough pressure to make the point. Let me walk you to your car. Make sure you get there okay. Let go of my arm. Easy. He kept moving. We're just talking. At the cruiser, he pressed her against the hood, one hand flat between her shoulder blades, brief but unmistakable. She felt the warm metal through her sleeve. Around them, she was aware of people. A nurse near the exit who had stopped walking. A man in the visitor parking row who had gone very still. Someone behind the glass of the second-floor window. She put her hands flat on the hood and stayed still. Not because she was afraid, not because she didn't know exactly what she could do, because she knew something Sloane didn't. She breathed out slowly, felt the sun on the back of her neck, heard the distant sounds of the city, traffic on the main road, a delivery truck, the low-grade hum of a ventilation unit on the hospital roof. Normal sounds, ordinary Tuesday morning sounds, and underneath them, getting closer, something else. Sloane was still talking. She was only peripherally aware of what he was saying, something about lessons and knowing her place and the importance of understanding how things worked in Callum City. His voice had the rhythm of someone who'd done this before and expected the particular outcome that came from it. She was listening to what was under his voice. The engine sound was wrong for the neighborhood, too heavy, multiple vehicles, in a formation that wasn't commercial traffic. She turned her head just slightly to the left, and she saw them. 4 black SUVs turning into the main hospital entrance. No sirens, no lights. Moving with the quiet intentionality of people who didn't need to announce themselves because their presence was announcement enough. Sloane had stopped talking. He'd heard them too now. The vehicles parked with a precision that was entirely out of place in a hospital lot. The doors opened. The people who stepped out were in a mix of attire, some in military utility uniforms, some in civilian clothes that fit wrong in the way civilian clothes always fit wrong on people who spent most of their time in something else. All of them moved with a shared physical language, controlled, oriented, deliberate. The team lead, a woman in her 40s, compact and absolutely unhurried, walked directly to the ER entrance. She stopped at the door and spoke to a nurse who'd come outside, probably drawn by the same thing everyone else had been drawn by. Ava couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the nurse's reaction, a pause, a blink, and then the nurse pointed, across the parking lot, directly at her. The team lead turned, found her immediately. The way people trained to locate specific individuals in environments found them, not by scanning, but by going to the right place. She said something to the 2 soldiers nearest her. They started walking. Behind Ava, Sloane had gone very still. His hand was no longer anywhere near her. She could hear him recalibrating from the quality of the silence he was making. She straightened up from the hood and turned around. The 2 soldiers stopped about 6 feet away. The one in front was young, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of bearing that came from a specific type of training. He looked at her with recognition, or something close to it, like he was confirming a photo against the reality. "Ma'am," he said, "are you Ava Calloway?" She looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Sergeant First Class Calloway?" She hadn't heard that in 3 years. The sound of it landed somewhere beneath her sternum in a way she hadn't expected. "Former," she said. "What's this about?" He glanced once at Sloane, a fast, comprehensive glance that categorized him and moved on, and said, "Ma'am, we have a situation inside. You're going to need to come with us." "What kind of situation?" He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "The kind you're qualified to handle." Behind her, she heard Sloane say, with the diminished authority of someone who'd just watched the room change around him, "What the hell is going on?" Nobody answered him. The soldier looked at Ava, and she read something in his face beyond the professional composure. Urgency held in check, the tight control of someone who needed to move but was managing the approach carefully. "Please, ma'am," he said. She picked up her bag from the ground where it had fallen, slung it over her shoulder, and walked with them toward the hospital entrance without a backward glance. The nurse who'd been standing at the staff exit was still there. The visitor in the parking row was still watching. The person at the second-floor window hadn't moved. And Officer Sloane stood alone beside his cruiser, one hand on the roof, watching a woman he'd just tried to diminish walk away, flanked by federal soldiers, and whatever he was thinking in that moment, he kept it to himself. The ER had changed. Ava felt it the moment she stepped through the automatic doors, the particular quality of a department that had received news and hadn't yet processed it. Staff moving with that slightly too controlled pace that happened when people were scared but functioning. Dr. Reyes, the attending on since 7, was at the whiteboard with a marker in hand and not writing anything. The unit clerk had both phones off the hook. The team lead met her just inside the doors. "Sergeant," she said, and there was something in the way she said it, not ceremonial, just accurate, that Ava felt settle in her chest. It's just Ava now, Ava said. What happened? The woman handed her a tablet with a patient summary loaded. Ava read it in about 6 seconds. This came through the main entrance? 15 minutes ago, prison transport vehicle. The vehicle crashed on Route 9, 2 miles out. Multiple casualties inbound or already arrived. The subject in question was transferred here first by separate team. Ava read the vitals. She read the mechanism of injury. She read the treatment that had been attempted so far. Something moved in her recognition, a very specific pattern she hadn't thought about in 3 years. Not consciously, but which came back with the immediacy of anything learned in conditions where not knowing it cost lives. Who's treating him? Dr. Mathers was called down. He reviewed, and Mathers is an administrator. He hasn't treated a trauma since... She stopped. Who's the attending? Dr. Reyes? Get me Reyes. The team lead nodded and moved. Ava was already reading the summary again, more slowly, her mind working through the implications of each line. The name at the top of the file was classified. Even on this summary, it showed only an ID number and a designation. Priority subject, federal protection status, do not disclose. But the injury pattern told her things the name didn't have to. She'd seen this exact combination before. The specific way blunt force and rapid deceleration interacted with a particular set of physical characteristics under particular circumstances. She'd seen it once, at a field station, in conditions she wasn't authorized to discuss, on a man whose life had depended on one specific intervention that the standard trauma algorithm didn't account for. She lowered the tablet. Down the hall, through the window of Trauma Bay 1, she could see the activity, figures moving in the compressed choreography of an active resuscitation, the oscillating light of monitors, Dr. Reyes' voice carrying without the words being clear. She could also see from where she stood the readout on the monitor above the bay door. The number it was showing should not have been going in the direction it was going. Ma'am! The soldier who'd met her in the parking lot was at her shoulder. What do you need? She handed him the tablet. I need to get into that room, she said, and I need someone to tell Dr. Reyes that I'm coming so he doesn't have to waste time arguing with me. The soldier was already moving. Ava pulled her hair tighter, rolled her sleeves back up, and walked toward Trauma Bay 1 at the same unhurried, ground-covering pace she used for everything. The pace that didn't look fast but always got there. The monitor readout above the door ticked down another point. She pushed through. The doors swung shut behind her. The trauma bay smelled the way all trauma bays smelled. Antiseptic, iron, the particular plastic smell of packaging torn open in a hurry. Equipment was clustered around the gurney in the way it clustered when people were working fast and running out of easy options. Dr. Reyes stood at the head of the bed, an RT at his left, 2 nurses working either side, a tech in the corner managing the monitor panel. Everyone looked up when she came in. Nobody moved. I'm Ava Calloway, she said to Reyes. Former Sergeant First Class, Combat Medical. I need 30 seconds. Reyes was 41, good physician, not someone who liked surprises. He stared at her for exactly the amount of time it took to decide something. You were suspended this morning. I know that. Then you know you have no authority to be in here. I know the injury pattern you're looking at, she said, and I know what's about to happen with that blood pressure if we don't change the intervention. She looked at the monitor. The number had ticked down another 2 points since she'd been in the hallway. You have maybe 4 minutes before you're looking at a different problem. Reyes held her gaze. Behind him, one of the nurses shifted and the monitor alarmed briefly. A single flat tone, before settling. Talk, Reyes said. She moved to the bedside and looked at the patient for the first time without the filter of the tablet summary. He was older, somewhere in his 60s, gray at the temples, a face that had been weathered by something more specific than age. There was scarring at his left jaw and throat that wasn't from this incident. His breathing was labored but rhythmic, and the way his chest moved was wrong on the right side in a way that was subtle enough that if you were running a standard trauma algorithm, you might have categorized it correctly and still treated it wrong. The right-sided tension component is compensating, she said, keeping her voice at the pace of someone who had enough time but not much more. Standard decompression is going to relieve pressure, but it's also going to drop his MAP before he has the volume to compensate. He needs the fluid first, specific sequence, or you decompress and he bottoms out. Reyes was listening. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. That's not in the protocol. No. It's from 8 years of treating this specific mechanism in field conditions where we couldn't run the standard protocol. She looked at him directly. I have seen this exact presentation 4 times. I can count on one hand how many times the standard sequence worked. And the others? She held his gaze. They didn't. The monitor alarmed again. This time, it didn't settle on its own. Reyes looked at the readout, looked at her, looked at the readout again. Walk me through it, he said. Step by step. You call each step, I authorize. My hands. Deal. What followed was not smooth. It was not the clean choreography of a television medical drama, where the right choice was always obvious, and every intervention landed exactly as intended. It was 13 minutes of controlled problem solving under conditions that kept shifting, where 2 things that should have worked sequentially turned out to need to happen almost simultaneously, where one of the nurses had to be redirected twice because the verbal shorthand Ava was using came from a context the nurse had never worked in, and where Dr. Reyes had to make a real-time decision at minute 9 that she had not anticipated and that turned out, afterward, to have been correct. The patient's blood pressure stabilized at minute 11. Not perfectly, not the robust recovery number you wanted, but it stopped falling, held, and then incrementally began to climb. At minute 13, Reyes stepped back from the bed and exhaled through his nose. Nobody spoke for a moment. Okay, he said finally, to no one in particular. Then he looked at Ava. Who taught you the fluid sequence? A surgeon at a forward operating base in a country I can't name. She was watching the monitor. He improvised it the first time. We refined it after. It's not in any literature I've read. No, it's the kind of thing that gets passed person to person in contexts where you can't publish. Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then, he still needs imaging. We don't know what we haven't seen yet. Agreed. And he's going to need monitoring beyond what we can give him here if this is what I think it is. What do you think it is? She hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because the answer had implications she was still arranging in her head. The injury pattern is consistent with something specific, a vehicle mechanism under particular conditions. She paused. The kind of conditions where you're not using a seatbelt because the vehicle configuration doesn't allow for it, and where the vehicle is designed to move fast and stop faster. Reyes looked at her. You're saying this isn't an accident. I'm saying the physics don't fully add up to a straightforward transport crash. She glanced at the door, where she could see through the narrow window the shapes of the soldiers positioned outside. And the people in the hallway aren't here because of a routine incident. The patient moved. Not much, a subtle shift of the right hand, the head turning a fraction. But it was voluntary motion, oriented, the body trying to locate itself. Both of them went still and watched. His eyes opened. They were gray, a very pale, clear gray. And despite everything, they came into focus faster than they had any business doing. His gaze went to the ceiling first, then to Reyes, then, directly, as if he'd known exactly where she was standing, to Ava. He held her face in his gaze for a moment, then, in a voice that was rough and quiet, and carried a specific quality she recognized, Calloway. The sound of it moved through her differently than she expected. She'd prepared, somewhere in the back of her mind, for the possibility that this was who she thought it was, the injury pattern, the military presence, the protection status. She thought she was ready. She wasn't entirely. Sir, she said. How bad? You'll live. A sound that might have been a short exhale of amusement. That's what you always said. It was usually accurate. His eyes moved to Reyes. Is she being truthful? Reyes looked between them for a moment with the expression of someone watching a conversation that had context he wasn't privy to. The immediate crisis is stabilized. We need imaging. Your vitals are trending in the right direction. Good enough. His eyes went back to Ava. Tell me what I'm dealing with. She gave him the short version. Clinical, accurate, without comfort that wasn't earned. He listened without interrupting, which was what she remembered about him. He was one of the few people she'd worked with who understood that interrupting the person giving you the medical summary was one of the least efficient things you could do. The right side, he said when she finished. Yes. I had a feeling. He shifted slightly, and she could see him assessing the pain with the systematic detachment of someone who'd been doing it for a long time. How long was I out? Best estimate, based on when you came through the door. Roughly 25 minutes. The others from the vehicle? She glanced at Reyes, who said, "Multiple casualties incoming. Our trauma team is managing them." He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the gray had a different quality. Still focused, but calculating now, running something internal that she could see moving behind his face. "I need to speak with my team lead." "Outside." "In a few minutes," Ava said. "Now, Calloway?" "Sir." She put enough pressure into it that he stopped. "You have a right-sided injury that is currently held together by a sequence of interventions that have not fully set. If you sit up, if you exert, if you do anything that spikes your pressure in the next 30 minutes, we are back to the same problem we just spent 13 minutes resolving. So, in a few minutes." He looked at her with the expression she also remembered, the one that happened when he was recalibrating, deciding whether this was a situation that required him to assert authority or one that required him to accept it. "You always were difficult," he said. "You always needed someone to be." Outside the bay, the hallway had reorganized itself. The soldiers from the parking lot were positioned at either end of the corridor. The team lead, whose name Ava learned from the brief introduction in the doorway, was Vasquez, had set up a kind of mobile coordination point at the nurses' station that the actual nurses were working around with varying degrees of patience. Someone had blocked the corridor to non-essential traffic. A second medical team, federal by the look of their gear, had arrived and was in conversation with the incoming trauma attending about the prison transport casualties coming through the main entrance. Ava stood in the corridor for a moment and absorbed all of it. She'd been suspended less than 2 hours ago. She'd been pressed against the hood of a police cruiser 40 minutes ago. She was standing in her own clothes, jeans and a gray long sleeve, in a trauma corridor that had been partially commandeered by what she was increasingly certain was a federal intelligence protective detail, having just stabilized a man she hadn't seen in 3 years. The human brain's capacity to normalize extraordinary circumstances in real time was, she thought, one of its less discussed features. "You need a coffee," said a voice to her left. She turned. Dr. Reyes was leaning against the wall, still in his trauma gown, holding 2 paper cups. He held one out. She took it. "Thanks. You want to tell me who that is?" "No." "Can't or won't?" "Both." She drank the coffee, which was terrible. "How are the transport casualties looking?" 3 serious, 1 critical, our team is handling." He was quiet for a moment. "The critical one is a federal transport officer, not a prisoner." "I saw the preliminary numbers." "Different mechanism from your patient. Straightforward blunt trauma. Bad luck positioning in the vehicle." "They'll be okay?" "The 3 serious ones, probably. The critical..." He paused. 50-50, honestly. It hit the wrong way." She nodded, drank more of the terrible coffee. "You want to tell me how you know the man in Bay 1? Reyes asked. She considered the question. There were several accurate answers, and none of them were things she was in a position to say in a hospital hallway. "We served in the same theater," she said finally. "Different capacities. Our paths crossed." "And he knew your name?" "He knew my rank and name, yes." "He didn't look like someone who forgets things." "He's not." Reyes looked at his own cup. "My last job was at St. Agatha's. It was a level 1 trauma center, twice the resources we have here, 3 times the staff. I've been here 7 months," he paused. "I've never had a morning that looked like this." "No," she said. "I imagine not." Down the corridor, the door to the administrator wing opened and Director Holt came through it. He was 60-something, silver-haired, a face built for reassuring donors, currently wearing the expression of someone who had been pulled out of something comfortable into something inexplicable. He stopped when he saw Ava. "Miss Calloway," he said, with the specific tone of someone mentally reviewing liability implications. "You're aware that you're currently under a suspension review?" "Yes." "Then you should not be in this department." Vasquez appeared from approximately nowhere. She didn't move fast or make a production of it. She was simply suddenly between Holt and Ava with the positioning of someone who had trained to be exactly where she needed to be. "Director Holt," she said, "I'm Agent Vasquez, Federal Protective Services. Ms. Calloway is here at our request. She provided critical medical assistance to our protectee in the last 30 minutes. Holt stared at her. "This hospital has a full trauma team. Your trauma team was there. Ms. Calloway's specific intervention is what stabilized him. I'd strongly recommend that whatever internal administrative situation is pending, you let it sit until this is over." Her voice was courteous, absolutely clear, and carried the specific texture of a person who was stating facts rather than making arguments. "My team will cooperate fully with your staff and your process. We just need this hallway for the next few hours." Holt opened his mouth, looked at Vasquez, looked at Ava, looked at the soldiers at either end of his corridor, closed his mouth. "I'll need to make some calls," he said. "Of course," Vasquez said. "Thank you, Director." He retreated. Vasquez turned to Ava without particular expression. "You good?" "Yeah." A pause. "Where's Sloan?" "The officer from the parking lot?" Vasquez said it neutrally. "Still outside last I knew." "Why?" "He's going to be in my director's office in about 20 minutes constructing a narrative about this morning." "Let him," Vasquez said. "We have cameras in the parking lot, Ms. Calloway. Ours." She said it simply, without weight, and turned to consult with one of her team. Ava stood for a moment with her terrible coffee, and absorbed that too. And chat. The imaging came back 40 minutes later. She was in the family consultation room. Not because she was family, but because Vasquez had cleared it for her use while the situation resolved, and she had nowhere else particularly useful to be. When Reyes knocked and came in with the results on his tablet, she looked at them. Took her time. "The rib fractures are what we expected," Reyes said. "What we didn't see coming is here." He pointed. "This level of contusion suggests the mechanism was more violent than a standard transport crash. The distribution is consistent with..." He paused. "I don't actually know what it's consistent with, because I haven't seen it." "I have," she said. He waited. "It's consistent with a concussive breach event. Close proximity. The body absorbs the pressure wave differently depending on the vector." She handed the tablet back. "He was in an armored vehicle and the vehicle was hit." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "That's not what the incident report says." "No," she said, "it's not. The incident report says the transport vehicle lost control on Route 9 and struck the median barrier. I know what the incident report says." "Are you telling me?" "I'm telling you I know what this injury pattern looks like and why I recognize it." She looked at him steadily. "What I'm not telling you is anything specific about the incident, because I don't have confirmed information about that, and I'm not going to speculate in a medical consultation space." He studied her. "You're very careful about what you say." "I learned to be." He set the tablet down. "What does he need going forward, medically?" "Close monitoring for the next 6 to 8 hours. The right side is the concern. It's going to be temperamental. If he stays stable through tonight, he's probably going to be okay. He'll need surgery consult on the rib situation, but it can wait." She paused. "He'll push to leave before he's ready." I got that impression. "Tell him it's not a recommendation. It's a hard stop. He responds to clinical language better than to appeals." A slight pause. "Don't let him convince you that he knows his own body better than the imaging does. He does know his body well, that's the problem. It makes him think he can override the data." Reyes looked at her with the expression she was getting used to from him, the one where he was reassembling context. "How long did you work with him?" "Long enough." At 1:15 in the afternoon, Nursing Director Mathers found her in the family consultation room. She heard him in the hallway first, the particular sound of his walk, slightly heavier on the right side, recognizable after 3 years, and had positioned herself by the window when he came in, standing rather than sitting, which was a choice she'd made deliberately. He looked at her the way you looked at a situation that had gotten away from you. "I need to understand what's happening." "A federal protectee came through this morning," she said. "I assisted with the medical management. You can verify that with Agent Vasquez." "I've spoken with Vasquez." He stopped in the middle of the room. "She told me that your intervention was critical. Those are her words." Okay. I suspended you 3 hours ago. Yes. And then a federal team arrived and they asked for me specifically. I was in the parking lot. She paused. I could have declined. I didn't, because the patient needed the intervention. Mathers rubbed the back of his neck. It was one of his habits, the tell that he was not in a comfortable place. Holt is on his third phone call with the hospital's legal team. What about Officer Sloan's complaint? A pause. What about it? She said. That's, under the circumstances, that's being reviewed in a different context. You might want to be more specific. He looked at her with the uncomfortable look of a man deciding how much honesty the situation required. Sloan called in about 40 minutes after the military vehicles arrived. He wanted to speak with Holt directly. About? About getting ahead of something, was the implication. He paused. Holt wasn't available. He left a message. Then he called again. He stopped. And? She said. He's been in his cruiser in the parking lot for the last 2 hours. He hasn't left. Ava turned that over. Sloan sitting in a parking lot watching the situation evolve, trying to figure out which way to move. The specific calculation of a man who understood that the ground had shifted and was trying to determine which pieces of what he'd done were going to be visible when the light changed. He was caught on camera, she said. Wasn't he? Mathers said nothing, which was its own answer. Not just hospital cameras, she said. More silence. Mathers, she said, I'm going to ask you something and I need you to actually answer it. Not the version you'd put in a report, not the version that protects the institution, just the answer. She waited until he looked at her. When Holt called you this morning about Greer and told you to pull me from the floor, did you think he was right? He held her gaze for a long moment. His hand moved toward the back of his neck, and then stopped, like he'd caught himself. No, he said. I didn't think you'd done anything wrong. But you did it anyway. I thought it would be resolved quickly. I thought... He stopped, tried again. I thought the path of least resistance was the right management call. The path of least resistance left a 62-year-old veteran sitting in pain in Bay 6 while we had this conversation, she said. And it left me in a parking lot where an officer with a history of complaints felt like he had enough cover to put his hands on me. She held his gaze. That's where that path went. He didn't answer. I need you to know I'm not saying that to make you feel bad, she continued. I'm saying it because it's true, and because the next time there's a call from Holt about pulling someone who followed the protocol correctly, you need to remember where that road goes. The silence stretched. Finally, he said, What do you need right now? I need Bay 1's patient to have consistent nursing coverage with someone who won't get rattled by the federal team, and I need Gerald Oak's discharge paperwork to be correctly processed, because he was here since 5 this morning, and someone should make sure he actually gets home. Mathers blinked. The man with the dislocated shoulder. He was the first patient I saw this morning. He's been here all day. She picked up her bag. If it's possible, I'd like to know when he's cleared so I can at least say goodbye. He stared at her for a moment. You were suspended. I know. Officially, you're still... I know. I'm saying it as a person, not as an employee. He's 62, he came in alone, and he waited 6 hours and nobody gave him any trouble about it. She paused. Some people just deserve a proper goodbye. So, the afternoon moved into that particular late-day light that happened in Callum City in autumn. A low golden quality that made the hospital's institutional surfaces look less institutional for about 40 minutes before it faded. Ava sat in the family consultation room and answered questions from Vasquez's team for the better part of an hour, careful with what she said, accurate in everything she said. They recorded it. She expected they would. At 3:45, Vasquez came in alone and sat across from her. He wants to see you, she said. Imaging review? No. He asked for you specifically. A brief pause. He's been asking every 20 minutes. Dr. Reyes finally said his vitals were stable enough that the conversation was probably doing more damage than allowing it. Ava stood. Has the situation outside been contained? Vasquez measured her words. The Route 9 incident is officially a traffic accident resulting from mechanical failure. That's the public statement. And unofficially? Unofficially, Vasquez said. We have an investigation that is very much ongoing, and 2 individuals in federal custody, and my team is here until we know this facility is no longer a relevant location. You think someone knew he was being moved today? I think, Vasquez said carefully, that certain aspects of today's timeline raise questions that we are actively pursuing. Ava nodded. She'd thought the same thing. An armored transport vehicle didn't sustain that injury pattern from hitting a median barrier. The physics simply didn't support it. And a man with a federal protection status didn't end up at a civilian hospital by accident, which meant either the diversion to Hargrove Memorial was intentional on someone's part, or the situation on Route 9 had created conditions where it was the closest viable option. Both possibilities had implications she was not going to walk through out loud in a hospital hallway. She followed Vasquez to Bay 1. "Bah!" They'd moved him slightly. The head of the bed elevated a few degrees, which she noted approvingly. He looked more alert than he had before, and still exhausted in the bone-deep way that came from significant trauma and the body's response to it. There was a soldier stationed inside the room now, positioned near the door, who acknowledged her with a nod and a step to the side. She pulled a stool to the bedside and sat down. "Better," she said, looking at his color. "I've looked better," he said. "That's accurate." She folded her hands on her knee. "What did you want to tell me?" He looked at her for a moment. His gray eyes had the quality she remembered from a very different context. The ability to hold multiple things at once without the effort being visible. Assessment, calculation, something underneath both of those. "I heard about the situation in the parking lot," he said. "It's handled." "The officer." "I said it's handled." He held her gaze. "I know what I'm seeing on your face. Sir, you're doing the thing where you tamp down the parts that would interfere with function." He said it without inflection, not critical. "You were always good at that. Too good sometimes." She looked at him. "Is that what you wanted to say?" "No." He shifted, careful, compensating for the right side, and settled. "I'm going to be moved to a federal medical facility within the next 12 hours. Once that happens, there are going to be conversations at several levels about today, about the incident, about what comes next." "Okay." "Those conversations are going to involve your name." She held still. "What happened in that bay this morning," he said, "is not going to stay inside this building. It can't. The people who need to know about it are going to know about it." He paused. "That's going to have consequences for you. Not bad ones, but consequences." "I'm not looking for consequences." "I know. That's part of why we're having this conversation now." He looked at her directly. "When people reach out to you, and they will, I need you to respond. Not for my sake, because what you can do is needed, and because you walking away from it isn't the same thing as it being done." She was quiet for a moment. The monitor above the bed tracked steadily. The soldier near the door was very professionally not listening. "You don't know what I walked away from," she said. "I know some of it. Some of it. Enough to understand why." His voice had changed, not softer exactly, but carrying something different underneath it. "Ava, I'm not going to tell you that what happened over there was handled correctly, because it wasn't. And I'm not going to tell you that coming back solves whatever it left in you. It doesn't." He paused. "I'm going to tell you that you walked into a room today and did something that nobody else in this building could have done. And that didn't go away just because you changed your clothes." She looked at him. After a moment, she said, "You need to rest." "I'm serious." "I know. Rest anyway." She stood. "When you're transferred and settled and have access to your files and your people and your full cognitive function, we can have this conversation properly." She straightened the edge of his sheet. It was a nurse's habit, and she'd stopped being self-conscious about it years ago. "Right now, you've got a right-sided injury that is going to test your patience every time you take a breath for the next 3 weeks, and you need to not spike your pressure." He looked up at her from the pillow. Something moved through his expression that she didn't fully categorize. "Still difficult," he said. "Still accurate," she said, and picked up her bag. "Oh, check." She was at the nurse's station, filling in the gap because Hargrove was short-staffed and the federal team's presence had disrupted 2 nurses' workflow, and Ava was, technically, still suspended, but also standing right there, when the door to the administrator wing opened again. This time, it wasn't Mathers. It wasn't Holt. It was a woman she had never seen before, in a charcoal suit that was too carefully chosen to be coincidental, carrying a leather portfolio and moving with the specific purposefulness of someone who had driven here directly from somewhere important. She stopped at the nursing station and looked at Ava. "Miss Calloway?" "Yes." "Renata Obi. I'm the federal liaison for the Protective Services Division." She held out an ID that Ava checked briefly. "I need about 20 minutes of your time. There are some things you need to be aware of before the end of the day." Ava looked at her, then looked back at the chart she'd been helping with, made a note that was clear and complete so whoever picked it up would know exactly where things stood. 20 minutes, she said. They found an empty consultation room down the hall, and Obi closed the door and set her portfolio on the table and opened it. There were several pages inside. Ava could see from where she sat that some of them had markings that indicated classification levels. "What I'm about to share with you is preliminary," Obi said, "but it's better you hear it from me now than from an unofficial channel later." She looked up from the portfolio. "We have a preliminary timeline from the Route 9 incident. The vehicle's onboard systems were still transmitting at the time of the event. What that data shows is not consistent with a mechanical failure." "I know," Ava said. Obi paused. "We also have video from the hospital parking lot. The federal camera system that my team activated when we arrived here captured approximately 14 minutes of footage from before our vehicles entered the lot." She paused again, with the particular rhythm of someone who was managing information deliberately. "Ms. Calloway, Officer Sloan's conduct in that footage, the physical contact, is unambiguous." Ava said nothing. "He had prior complaints on record," Obi continued. 7 of them, spanning 6 years, all reviewed internally, none resulting in suspension or formal discipline. She looked at Ava directly. "As of this afternoon, Callum City PD's Internal Affairs Division has been contacted by our office. They've been given the footage and the complaint history with a federal request for a full review." Ava let that settle. "I want to be clear," Obi said. "This action was not taken because of your association with our protectee. It was taken because of what the footage shows. Those are 2 separate things." "I understand the distinction," Ava said. "Good." Obi looked back at her portfolio. "There's one more thing." She turned a page. "The administrative record from this hospital, your suspension this morning, the complaint from Officer Sloan, the circumstances under which it was filed, that's also been flagged in our documentation, not as a federal action, as context." She looked up. "Context that will be relevant to certain conversations that are going to happen in the next 72 hours. Ava looked at the table for a moment, then back at Obi. "What conversations?" Obi closed the portfolio. She held Ava's gaze with the steady quality of someone delivering news that wasn't bad and wasn't good and was simply significant. "The kind," she said, "that don't happen until the right people know your name." And in that moment, before Ava could respond, before anything else shifted, her phone buzzed once on the table between them. A text message. Unknown number, but the format was unmistakable to anyone who'd received it before. An 8-digit case designation, a timestamp, and a single line of text that read, "Standing by for your response." She stared at it. Obi watched her face, said nothing, because whoever had sent it already knew she'd seen it, and they were waiting. The phone sat on the table between them like something that had just changed temperature. Ava looked at the 8-digit case designation. She knew the format. She'd used it for years. Had it memorized in a different context, a different life. A context she'd spent 3 years building distance from. The format didn't change. The people who used it didn't change the format. Obi was watching her with the careful neutrality of someone who already knew what the message was and had been waiting to see how Ava received it. "This was coordinated," Ava said. "The message was sent by someone with authorization to send it. Beyond that, I'm not in a position to—" "I'm not asking for your position." Ava looked up from the phone. "I'm making an observation. The message went out before your conversation finished, which means whoever sent it knew what we were discussing, which means this room isn't as private as consultation rooms are supposed to be." Obi held her gaze. "You're not wrong." "So this whole conversation was a setup." "It was an introduction," Obi said. There's a difference. Ava looked back at the phone. The message hadn't changed. It was still sitting there. The timestamp now 3 minutes old. The 8 digits that meant someone with a clearance level above what she currently held had her number and was waiting. She thought about the patient in Bay 1. The way he'd said you walking away from it isn't the same thing as it being done. She'd told him to rest. She'd walked out of the room, and then she'd been walked directly into this. He set this up, she said. Obi didn't confirm, didn't deny, which was confirmation enough. Ava picked up the phone, typed 2 words, received, standby, and set it face down on the table. I'm not making any decisions today, she said. Not while I'm standing in a hospital I've been suspended from, in my street clothes, on about 3 hours of sleep and 1 terrible coffee. That's reasonable, Obi said, but I want something in return. Obi waited. Sloan, Ava said, I want to know the complaints that were buried, not the summary, the actual complaints, names, dates, what happened to the people who filed them. Obi studied her. That's a records request that would normally go through. I know what it would normally go through. I'm asking you. Ava held her gaze. You said the footage was unambiguous. You said the complaints were on record. If you're asking me to step back into a context where I operate on trust, I need to know whether the people in that context actually do something with information or whether they bury it the same way the city did. A beat of silence. I'll see what I can do, Obi said. Not good enough. Another beat. Obi reached into her portfolio, removed a single page, and slid it across the table. This is what I can authorize today. Ava picked it up and read it. 7 complaints, 7 names, 7 dates spanning 6 years. Beside each name, a disposition, reviewed internally, no action taken, again and again. The same phrase 7 times, in bureaucratic shorthand that translated to, we knew and we didn't do anything. One of the names was a nurse. Same hospital, different department 4 years ago. The complaint described a situation in the parking lot. Different details, same structure. Ava set the page down carefully. He's done this before, she said. Yes. To a nurse at this hospital. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. The specific weight of it. Not surprise because she'd suspected, but confirmation, which landed differently. The nurse's name was Delphine Marsh. The date was 4 years ago. Delphine Marsh had filed a complaint. It had been reviewed internally, and no action had been taken, and Sloan had kept his badge and kept working, and had been in this parking lot this morning doing the same thing to someone else. Where is she now? Ava asked. Marsh. She left the hospital 8 months after filing. We believe she relocated. You believe? We haven't confirmed her current location yet. Ava looked at the table, looked at the page, looked up at Obi. Find her, she said. Before any of this goes further, before any press release, any official statement, anything, find her and make sure she knows what's happening. She deserves to not find out about this the wrong way. Obi wrote something in her portfolio, not performatively, just wrote it, quick and neat, the action of someone taking an actual note. I'll prioritize it. The rest of the afternoon moved in layers. Ava went back to the nurse's station because the department was still short and because standing still in a consultation room was not something her nervous system was capable of for extended periods. She worked alongside the remaining staff, not as a suspended employee, not as anything official, just as someone who knew where things were and what needed to happen next and filled the gaps without being asked. Nobody told her to stop. Mathers, who passed through twice, saw her and said nothing. At 4:30, Dr. Reyes updated her on the transport casualties. The 3 serious cases had all been stabilized. The critical one, the federal transport officer, had gone to surgery at 3:15 and was still in the OR. The surgeon, a compact and precise woman named Dr. Farida Osei, who Ava had worked with exactly twice and respected significantly, had sent word that it was going to be a long procedure, but she was cautiously optimistic, which from Osei meant something more than it would for most people. The patient in Bay 1 was resting. The federal team had rotated coverage. Vasquez had posted someone at the ER entrance and someone in the parking structure and had quietly, without announcement, done a sweep of the hospital's external perimeter that most of the staff hadn't noticed. Ava had noticed. At 5:10, she was standing at the supply station replenishing a cart when her phone buzzed again. Same unknown number, different message this time. Not an 8-digit code, just, "There's been a development. We need you in the room." She stared at it for a moment, then looked up because she'd heard the shift in the noise level from the direction of Bay 1 before she consciously registered what it meant. It was subtle. Not an alarm, not a shout. Just a change in the texture of activity. The particular sound of people moving with controlled urgency. She was already moving before she'd made the decision to move. Bay 1 had 3 people in it who shouldn't have been there. That was the first thing she clocked as she pushed through the door. Vasquez's soldier was outside rather than inside, which was wrong, and the 3 people standing around the patient's bed were not medical staff. 2 men and a woman, civilian clothes, the kind of bearing that came from the same context as Vasquez's team, but a different division of it. The patient was trying to sit up and arguing with someone on the phone simultaneously, which was exactly what she'd told him not to do, and his monitor was showing what happened when someone with a right-sided injury tried to sit up and argue with someone simultaneously. "Stop," she said. All 3 people looked at her. The patient looked at her. "Sir, lie back." "Calloway, lie back or I'm removing everyone from this room and we start the monitoring protocol over from scratch. That adds 6 hours to when you can be transferred." Well, he held her gaze for the 2 seconds it took to calculate whether she was serious. She was always serious. He knew that. He lay back. She moved to the monitor, checked the readout, checked his face. His color had shifted, not dramatically, but enough. She adjusted the head elevation 1 degree, checked the right side equipment, took his pulse manually because sometimes the machine was a second behind what your fingers told you. His heart rate was elevated. She'd expected that. "Who are these people?" she asked, without looking at the 3 visitors. One of the men spoke. "Director Callum, Federal Intelligence Oversight. We have clearance to speak with. You can speak with him in about 20 minutes when his pressure comes back down." She looked at the man directly. "Unless one of you has a medical reason that makes it faster?" None of them did. "Wait outside." They looked at the patient. He made a brief gesture with his hand, "Go," and they went. She waited until the door closed. The monitor was already improving, marginally. She checked it twice, then looked at him. "What happened?" she said. "There's been a development in the investigation." His voice was tight. Not from pain exactly, but from the specific tension of someone managing information they needed to act on from a position where they couldn't act. "The 2 individuals in federal custody. One of them talked." She was quiet. "There's a 3rd party," he said. "Someone inside the transport coordination. Someone who knew the route, the timing, the vehicle configuration." He paused to manage his breathing. She could see him doing it, the deliberate rhythm of a man who'd been trained to regulate under pressure. "Someone with access to internal scheduling." "Here?" she said. "Not here, but proximate." He looked at her. "The 3rd party made a call this morning. Timestamp puts it at 9:42, while the vehicle was on Route 9. 9:42, 40 minutes after she'd been pulled from the floor, 20 minutes before the transport crash. "That's why they need me in the room," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have context they don't have. You know the physical layout of the situation from the inside, and—" He stopped, controlled his breathing again. "The 3rd party made a second call. 2 hours ago. To a number registered to Callum City Police Department." She held still. "That's not confirmed yet," he said. "It's a preliminary trace, but the trace is solid." She looked at the monitor, looked at him. The weight of what he'd just told her was organizing itself in her mind into a shape that was becoming clearer and more specific and considerably more complicated. Sloan had been in the parking lot since 10 that morning. Still there, by last report. The timestamp on the second call was 2 hours ago, which was around the time Obi had sat down across from her with a portfolio and a page of 7 complaints, and the kind of careful neutrality that Ava now understood differently. Not just an introduction, a test of how much she already knew and how she responded to it. She'd passed something, or failed something. She wasn't sure which. "I need you to stay still," she said to him. I need your pressure to stabilize, and then I need to make a call. Calloway. 20 minutes, she said. We don't have 20, sir. She leaned in slightly, dropped her voice. If you don't let your body recover from what you just did to it, the transfer can't happen tonight. And if the transfer can't happen tonight, you're in a civilian hospital with 2 federal agents in a public parking structure, and whatever situation is developing outside this building is developing around a target that is not adequately secured. So, she held his gaze. 20 minutes. He looked at her for a long moment, the gray eyes doing their calculation. 18, he said. Fine. She made the call from the corridor, standing close to the wall, voice low. Vasquez answered on the second ring. The parking structure, Ava said. Your agent there, is she in visual contact with Sloane's vehicle? A brief pause. She was 20 minutes ago. He was still inside the vehicle. Can you confirm current? She heard Vasquez say something to someone else. A pause, then, she's checking now. Ava waited. The corridor around her was doing its late afternoon thing. Staff changeover beginning, the department adjusting to the incoming shift, the particular sound of a hospital transitioning from one phase to the next. Normal sounds. She tracked them peripherally while she waited. Vasquez came back. Ms. Calloway, the vehicle is empty. She registered that without visible reaction. When did he leave? She doesn't have a confirmed time. The vehicle is parked, but the officer is not in it, and she does not have a visual. He's in the building, Ava said. A beat. Why would? Because he's been sitting in that lot for 6 hours, calculating which direction to run, and he's just figured it out. She was already moving, walking the corridor toward the administrator wing. He doesn't know what the camera's got. He doesn't know what Obi's team pulled. He knows Holt hasn't called him back, and he knows something has shifted, and he's come inside to find someone who can tell him how bad it is. I'll have 2 agents. Don't intercept him yet. I need to know who he goes to first. A pause. Miss Calloway, that's not your call. You're right. She stopped walking, thought about it. But who he goes to first tells you who knew this morning, who knew and made room for him to do what he did. That's useful information, isn't it? Vasquez was quiet for a moment. We have cameras on the internal hallways. Then watch them. I'm not confirming we'll wait. I'm not asking you to. Ava looked down the corridor toward the administrator wing. I'm just saying that the person he walks toward in the next 5 minutes is a person whose name you're going to want in whatever file you're building. She hung up, stood in the corridor for a moment, letting the information arrange itself. Sloane was in the building. The patient in Bay 1 had 18 minutes on his clock, give or take. Osei was still in surgery. Director Callum's team was in the hallway outside Bay 1, waiting. And somewhere in this building, a man who'd spent the morning constructing a narrative about an obstructive nurse was walking towards someone he trusted, someone who had the institutional standing to make calls disappear and complaints stay buried, and who had been doing exactly that for at least 6 years. The administrator wing door opened. Not Sloane. Mathers. He came through with the expression of a man who had just received information that was making him reconstruct his morning. He saw Ava. Stopped. He's here, he said. I know. He came to... Mathers stopped. Something moved across his face. He came to my office. He wanted me to pull the camera footage from the parking lot and delete it. Said it was a misunderstanding and the footage would be misread. He looked at her. He said Holt had already approved it. Ava looked at him carefully. Had he? Mathers held her gaze. I don't know, I didn't ask. A pause that had weight in it. I told him I couldn't access the footage, that it was currently under federal hold. He didn't like that. Where is he now? He went toward Holt's office. She thought about Obi's cameras, about Vasquez watching internal feeds, about the timestamp that put a call from someone in transport coordination to a Callum City police number at 9:42 in the morning. She thought about Delphine Marsh, who had filed a complaint 4 years ago and then left the hospital and relocated and whom federal agents hadn't confirmed the location of yet. She thought about Gerald Oakes, who had waited 6 hours with a dislocated shoulder and hadn't complained once, and had been attended to by a nurse who was now standing in a corridor in street clothes in a building she'd been suspended from, holding a situation together with both hands. "Mathers," she said, "I need you to do something." He straightened slightly. "What?" "Whatever Holt tells you in the next 10 minutes, whatever Sloan tells Holt and Holt tells you, I need you to document it. Time, exact words, who said what. Not for me. For the investigation." He looked at her. "The federal investigation." "Yes." A long pause. She could see him measuring it. The path of least resistance versus the other path, which was harder and less certain and required him to remember that the path of least resistance was where he'd already been today and where it had taken him. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He turned and went back through the administrator wing door. Ava stood alone in the corridor for a moment. Checked the time. 14 minutes had passed since she'd left Bay 1. She turned back toward the bay. Behind her, at the far end of the corridor, she heard a door open. Not the administrator wing, a different door. And voices. More than 2 people. A tone she recognized. Not elevated. Not a shout. The specific cadence of official language deployed with authority. She looked back over her shoulder. And stopped. Because at the end of the corridor, 2 federal agents were standing in front of Director Holt's office with a posture that was unmistakable. And beside them was Obi. And through the partially open door of Holt's office, she could see, for just a second, before someone inside moved to close it, Officer Sloan. And beside him, Director Holt. And the expression on Holt's face was one she recognized from a different context. A context she hadn't been part of for 3 years. It was the expression of a man who had just understood that the room he thought he controlled had never been his room at all. The door clicked shut, and then her phone buzzed again. And this time it wasn't Vasquez, wasn't the unknown number, wasn't Obi. It was a number she recognized, a number she hadn't seen on her screen in 3 years. She stared at it for 1 full second, then picked up. "Calloway?" said the voice on the other end. She knew it immediately. Hadn't needed the number to confirm it. Would have known it from 2 words in any context, the same way you knew certain sounds, regardless of how long you'd been away from them. The voice was the same, older by 3 years maybe, slightly more compressed. Still the same. "Colonel Merritt," she said, "I heard you had a busy morning." She almost laughed. Almost. That's one way to put it. "I'm going to need you to come to a debrief. Tonight. There's a location being sent to your phone in the next 60 seconds. I'm in the middle of something. I know. This is part of that something." A brief pause, the kind that carried more content than the words around it. "Ava, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't necessary." She stood in the corridor and looked at the closed door at the far end and listened to the particular quality of the silence that had settled over Holt's office. "Tonight," she said. 9 o'clock. "All right." She hung up. 30 seconds later, a message arrived. An address in the east quarter of Callum City, an area she knew by reputation, industrial, the kind of neighborhood where unmarked vehicles didn't draw attention. She memorized the address and deleted the message in the same motion, which was also a thing you didn't forget how to do. Then she turned and walked back to Bay 1. Hello. The patient's pressure had stabilized. She checked everything twice, noted the improvements, and pulled the stool back to the bedside. Director Callum's team was still in the hallway and would remain there until she indicated otherwise. She'd been clear about that on her way in, and they'd accepted it with the resigned compliance of people who understood they were operating in someone else's domain. "You look like something happened," he said. Merritt called. He didn't react visibly. She hadn't expected him to. "And?" "Debrief tonight, 9 o'clock. He was quiet for a moment. The monitor tracked steadily above him. "I had nothing to do with that call." "I know. That one came from a different direction." "I assumed." She looked at the monitor, then back at him. "When are you being transferred?" "Vasquez is aiming for 8, pending your clearance. Your vitals are holding. The right side is behaving. If you maintain current position and don't exert, I'll clear you at 7:30. She paused. "That's not negotiable." "I know." He shifted very slightly, just his head, turning toward her a fraction more. "Ava, what they're going to tell you tonight, whatever merit has. Be careful how quickly you decide. I'm always careful. Not about this kind of thing. You're careful about people. You're careful about patients. His voice carried something underneath it that was not quite personal and not quite professional. The specific register of someone who'd watched a person function under extreme conditions and had formed an assessment that mattered to them. When it comes to your own situation, you move fast, you decide, and you commit. That's a strength, most of the time. She looked at him. Most of the time, she said. Just hear it out before you answer. She held his gaze for a moment. You know what they're going to offer. I have a reasonable idea. And you want me to take it. He was quiet for a beat. I want you to make the choice for the right reasons. He looked at the ceiling briefly, then back at her. Not because I'm lying in a hospital bed asking, not because of this morning, because it's what you actually want. She didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer yet that was honest, and she wasn't going to offer him one that wasn't. Rest, she said. I'll clear you at 7:30. The next 2 hours at Hargrove Memorial were the kind that looked ordinary from the outside and weren't. The federal agents remained. The internal cameras, Vasquez's team's equipment, not the hospital's, were running on the administrator wing. Ose came out of surgery at 6:10 and found Ava in the corridor to give her the update personally, which was unusual and which told Ava that Reyes had briefed her on the morning's context. The federal transport officer had made it through. Guarded prognosis, intensive monitoring required, but alive. Ava received that information and felt something she didn't fully examine, a relief that was partly clinical and partly not. At 6:20, Mathers found her again. He looked different from the morning, not broken down different, more like a man who had been carrying weight a particular way for a long time and had recently put it down and was still adjusting to the change in his posture. He came to her directly, didn't preamble. Holt's been in that room with 2 federal agents for an hour and 40 minutes, he said. I know. He hasn't come out. I know that too. Mathers was quiet for a moment. I documented everything, what Sloan said, what Holt's assistant told me before the agents went in. Exact words. She looked at him. Did you send it? I sent it to Vasquez's contact address 7 minutes ago. He held her gaze. She confirmed receipt. She nodded. Good. Sloan is still in there, with Holt. He paused. The 2 men who came in with him, 2 plainclothes officers I didn't recognize, they were in the waiting area for about 40 minutes, and then Vasquez's people walked them out. They didn't look happy. No, Ava said. They wouldn't. Ava. He used her name, which he almost never did. She registered it. I owe you an honest thing. She waited. When I pulled you this morning, he said, I told myself it was procedural, that it was management. He stopped. It wasn't. It was convenient. Holt's call gave me a path out of a difficult conversation with a man who had political cover, and I took it. He looked at the floor briefly, then back at her. That's not who I want to be, and I think I've been that person for long enough that I stopped noticing. She held his gaze. I know. That's it? You know? What else do you want me to say? She wasn't unkind about it. You're telling me a true thing. I believe it. The question is what comes after it. She paused. There are 7 complaints buried in Sloan's file. One of them is from a nurse at this hospital. Her name is Delphine Marsh. She filed 4 years ago and left 8 months later. She held his gaze. I want to know if this hospital made it easier or harder for her to stay. He went very still. I don't know, he said. Find out. Whatever HR has from that period, whatever the supervisory record shows, find it and send it to Vasquez's contact alongside what you already sent. She paused. Not for the federal case necessarily, just because she deserves someone at this hospital paying attention 4 years ago, and nobody did. And it's late, but it's not too late. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and walked back toward the administrator wing. At 7:15, she cleared the patient in Bay 1 for transfer. She did it properly. Full assessment, documented, communicated to Reyes, who countersigned, handed to Vasquez with a written summary of the conditions and what to monitor in the next 6 hours. Not a quick verbal handoff. A real one. The kind that meant whoever received him at the federal medical facility would have everything they needed without having to guess. The patient watched her do it with the gray eyes and said nothing. When she was finished and had stepped back from the bed, he said, "There's something I want to say before I go." "Sir, it won't take long." He adjusted slightly, not sitting up, just orienting toward her. 3 years ago, the situation that made you leave. I want you to know that I put in a formal request for review at the time. The outcome wasn't what I asked for. I don't know if you knew that. She hadn't known that. She held still and held his gaze and let herself feel the specific shape of that information. Not relief, exactly. Not vindication. Something more complicated. The particular texture of learning that someone had done the right thing in a room you weren't in, and it hadn't been enough, but they had done it anyway. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't." He paused. "I should have told you then. I didn't because the situation was active and I thought it would resolve." A beat. "It didn't." She nodded. There was more in the room than she was going to say, and they both understood that. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me." Vasquez's team arrived at 7:30 on the mark. The transfer was efficient. Not fast, but efficient, with the practiced organization of people who had done this before and knew which corners could not be cut. The patient was moved from Bay 1 on a gurney flanked by 4 agents through a corridor that Vasquez had briefly cleared toward a service exit where a transfer vehicle waited. He passed Ava in the corridor. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But as the gurney went past, his hand moved, just slightly, from where it rested on the sheet. And she put hers briefly in its path, and they clasped, once, the way soldiers did. The specific grip that wasn't comfort and wasn't ceremony. Something more than both. Then it was done, and he was moving, and she was standing alone in the corridor with her hand at her side. Holt's office door opened at 7:52. She was at the nursing station when it happened and watched from there. Obi came out first, then a man she hadn't seen before, taller, carrying a document case, moving with the specific unhurriedness of someone who'd gotten what they came for. Behind them, after a pause that stretched long enough to be notable, came Director Holt. He looked like a man who had been unpacked and repacked and wasn't sure the pieces had gone back in the same configuration. His suit was still perfect, but the face above it was not. He stopped in the corridor and looked in the direction of the nurses' station without appearing to see anything in particular. Sloan came out last. He was in uniform still. He'd been in the building for nearly 3 hours. He walked with the mechanical quality of someone operating on self-control that was costing him everything he had, and he went a different direction from Holt, toward the main entrance, not the administrator wing. And Ava watched him walk and saw, following at a distance of about 10 feet, with the positioning of someone who was not trying to be invisible, but who knew exactly where the exits were, 2 plainclothes federal agents matching his pace. He hadn't been detained. Not yet. She understood why. The case being built was not a simple one. It connected a police officer to a transport coordinator to an incident on Route 9 that was officially still a traffic accident, and cases like that didn't close with a parking lot arrest. They closed with a filing, with evidence gathered correctly, with a record that held up in a federal context where the difference between conviction and dismissal was often the difference between doing something right and doing something fast. She watched him go through the main entrance. The 2 agents followed him out. At 8:40, she sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and ate half of a sandwich she'd found in her bag from 2 days ago and drank water from a bottle that had been there longer than the sandwich. The parking lot was almost empty. The late shift was inside. The federal vehicles had reduced from 4 to 1. The others had followed the transfer. Her phone showed the address in the East Quarter. Her phone also showed, from 40 minutes ago, a message from an unknown number that wasn't the 8-digit format and wasn't Merritt. Just a name and a number with a note. Delphine Marsh. Confirmed current location. She's been told. She said to say thank you. Ava sat with that for a moment. She finished the sandwich, drank more water, looked at the spot where Sloan's cruiser had been parked for most of the day and wasn't anymore. Then she started the car. The address was a building in the East Quarter that had been a light manufacturing facility and was now whatever federal operations needed it to be on any given week. The outside was unremarkable, deliberately so. She parked on the street because the lot was visible from two angles, and parking on the street was a habit she hadn't shed, and walked to the entrance where a man checked her identification without speaking and waved her through. The interior was warmer than she expected. A corridor, some doors, and at the end of it a room that had been set up for a meeting, a table, chairs, a laptop, a large monitor on the wall showing a map of Callum City and surrounding area with several points marked. The Route 9 marker was labeled, but the label was in a code she'd have to be briefed on to read. Merritt was there. She recognized him before he stood. The build, the way he held his shoulders, the specific quality of the way he occupied a room. He was 60, or close to it. Hair that had gone entirely white in the last 3 years, from what she remembered. He stood when she came in. "Calloway?" he said. "Colonel?" "Sit down." He gestured at the chair across from him. "There's coffee. It's better than hospital coffee, which I understand is a low bar." She sat, poured coffee from the carafe on the table, drank some. He was right. It was better. "How's your arm, G?" he asked. She'd almost forgotten about the arm. The place where Sloane's hand had gripped above the elbow had developed a bruise she'd noticed changing in the locker room mirror that morning. She'd cataloged it and moved on. "Fine," she said. Merritt looked at her in the way of a man who knew. She knew he knew the answer wasn't complete and decided not to press it. "I'm going to walk you through what we know," he said. "And then I'm going to tell you what we're asking, in that order, because the second part doesn't make sense without the first." "All right." He turned the laptop toward her. What came up wasn't the map from the wall screen. It was a document, a summary, dense, cross-referenced with numbers that corresponded to a file system she'd have to be re-cleared to access fully. He walked her through it in the systematic, non-dramatic way of a person presenting intelligence rather than telling a story. No building of suspense, just the facts in the order they connected. The Route 9 incident had not been a traffic accident. The vehicle had been struck by a device designed to disable rather than destroy. The mechanism was specific and pointed to expertise. The two individuals in federal custody had been traced to a network that operated across 3 states, a network that had been under observation for 14 months. The leak in transport coordination, the third party who had made the 942 call, had been identified, a scheduling coordinator at the Regional Federal Transit Hub, a woman who had been recruited 18 months prior and had been passing information since. Sloane's connection to this network was indirect but documented. He had not been recruited in the operational sense. He had been useful, a local officer with a history of malleable ethics and political cover, someone the network had accessed twice previously for information about law enforcement response timelines in Callum City. The 942 call had gone to his personal cell, not his department line. The call had been 14 seconds, long enough to pass a single piece of information. The second call, 2 hours after the incident, had been Sloane calling back, not the network calling him, Sloane initiating, which indicated he'd understood what his information had been used for and had called to establish whether he had exposure. He did. Merritt walked her through the documentation without editorializing, and she listened without interrupting. When he was done, she drank her coffee, which had gone slightly cool, and looked at the map on the wall. "The network is still active," she said. "Yes." "The arrest of the coordinator and the 2 in custody doesn't close it." "No." "And Sloane's arrest, which I assume is coming. Within the next 48 hours, the case is being prepared correctly. That doesn't close it either." "No." Merritt leaned back slightly. "There are 2 remaining identified nodes, one in federal transit coordination, a different hub, one in a civilian context that we haven't fully mapped." He paused. "The civilian node is the one we don't have clean eyes on." She looked at him. "What kind of civilian context?" "Medical," he said. The room was quiet. She looked at the map. The marked points on it, which she'd categorized when she walked in as geographic reference, rearranged themselves in her understanding. Route 9, the hospital, the federal transit hub. 2 other points in the city she now understood were facility locations. You want me back, she said. We want you to consider a specific role, he said. Not a return to your previous position, a different structure. Civilian adjacent, medical cover legitimate rather than constructed. Embedded observation with full operational backing. In Callum City. Starting here, the scope is broader. She looked at the table. How long have you been planning this? The conversation has been ongoing for 6 months, he said. What happened today accelerated the timeline. Because your protectee ended up in my ER. Because a medic with your specific profile acted without hesitation in a situation where hesitation would have been easier and less complicated. He met her gaze directly. And because we've known for 14 months that the network has a medical node we can't identify, and you are the only person in our available pool who could exist credibly in that space. She absorbed that. You're telling me I'd be walking into an environment where someone in a medical context is connected to a network that just tried to kill a federal intelligence commander? Yes. And the cover would be my nursing position. Your nursing position, reinstated fully with whatever conditions you require. The hospital administration situation is being resolved at a level above Director Holt. Holt is being removed? Holt made a series of decisions today that have made his continued position untenable. Merritt said it without satisfaction, just as a fact. The board has been contacted. That process is separate from the federal investigation, but the timing is what it is. She was quiet for a moment. What happened to the person who filled my position 3 years ago? She asked. When I left. The situation that made me leave. Was it ever actually reviewed? Merritt held her gaze. Yes. And? The review resulted in 2 officers being removed from their positions. The record was sealed for operational reasons. He paused. I know that's not the same as knowing at the time. No, she said. It's not. She looked at the map again. The hospital marker sat in the middle of the city's geography the way hospitals always did. Central, accessible. The kind of location that made them useful for many things and made them, sometimes, something other than what they were supposed to be. I need 48 hours, she said. You have them. And I need something before I walk out of here. He waited. The 7 complaints against Sloan, she said. Delphine Marsh and the other 6. I want formal notification to every one of them when the arrest is made. Not a form letter. Something real. Something that tells them it mattered. She held his gaze. Whatever resources you have for outreach to protected witnesses, I want that applied here. Merritt looked at her for a moment. That's outside the scope of what I'm authorized to, then get authorized. She held his gaze. Those people filed reports and were ignored by every system that was supposed to protect them. If I'm going to walk back into this kind of work, I need to know that when someone does the right thing in this context, it doesn't just disappear. The room was quiet. Merritt reached across the table and picked up a pen. He wrote something on the notepad in front of him. She couldn't see what it was from her angle, but she could see the quality of it. Not a reminder to himself, but something with enough formality that it would be communicated. All right, he said. She stood, picked up her bag, looked at the map one more time, at all its marked points, at the particular geography of a city she'd spent 3 years settling into, at the hospital marker, and what it now meant. 48 hours, she said. Calloway. She stopped. For what it's worth, Merritt said, today was not the first time someone in this office said your name when a situation needed someone who could hold a room together under impossible conditions. He paused. It was just the first time you were already there. She looked at him for a moment, didn't answer that, walked out into the East Quarter night where the air was cold and the street was quiet, and somewhere across the city a man named Sloan was calculating how much time he had left, and a woman named Delphine Marsh had just received a phone call that was 4 years overdue, and in the morning the hospital would open again. The waiting room would fill. The board would be short-staffed, the coffee would be bad, and someone somewhere in that building was connected to something that had put a federal intelligence commander in a trauma bay. Ava got in her car, drove home in the dark, and when she pulled into her parking space and cut the engine, she sat for a moment in the silence and discovered that the decision she'd told Merritt she needed 48 hours to make was already, quietly, and without announcement, made. She slept for 6 hours, which was more than she expected and less than she needed, and woke at 5:14 without an alarm the way she always woke, not gradually, but all at once, like something inside her had been tracking the time through the dark, and decided 6 hours was what the situation allowed. She lay on her back for a moment and looked at the ceiling and let the previous day move through her mind in sequence. Not dwelling, just accounting. The kind of inventory you did after a significant operation to understand what had actually happened versus what you'd believed was happening in the moment, because those two things were often different and the difference mattered. What had happened? She'd been pulled from her floor, pressed against a car, escorted into a military situation by people who knew her name, stabilized a man she hadn't seen in 3 years, watched a corrupt officer walk into a building to find cover and find the opposite, sat across from a federal liaison who handed her a page of 7 names like a test, been called by a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years, and driven home in the dark with a decision already made that she'd told someone else she needed 2 days to make. What she'd believed in the moment, that she was managing one situation at a time. She got up, made coffee that was better than the hospital's, and considerably better than the carafe at the East Quarter building, stood at the window while it brewed and looked at the street below, the particular quiet of a city at 5:15 in the morning, before the first shift workers and the early commuters and the delivery trucks, when the streets had that brief quality of belonging to themselves. She thought about Delphine Marsh, about the name on a page of 7, and the note that said she said to say thank you. She thought about what thank you meant in that context, not gratitude for a favor, but the specific relief of learning that something you'd done when no one appeared to be paying attention had been seen, eventually, belatedly, but seen. She thought about Gerald Oakes, 62, who had waited 6 hours with a dislocated shoulder without complaint, and whether anyone had made sure he got home. She thought about the patient in Bay 1 and the clasp of a hand in a hospital corridor, and what he'd said. You walking away from it isn't the same thing as it being done. She drank her coffee. At 6:30, she picked up her phone and sent a message to Vasquez's contact address. Not about the operational situation, just one line. Did anyone confirm Gerald Oakes got home okay? The answer came back in 4 minutes. Confirmed. Discharge completed 4:47 p.m. Staff arranged transport. He's home. She read it twice. Set the phone down. Then she got dressed and drove to Hargrove Memorial. The morning shift was just beginning when she walked through the main entrance. Not the staff entrance, the main entrance, which she'd used deliberately because she was not arriving as staff. She was arriving as herself, in jeans and a clean shirt, and the distinction mattered. The ER was doing its early morning thing. The overnight cases being handed off, the waiting room at its lowest population of the day, the quiet that existed for exactly 1 hour before it stopped existing. 2 nurses she knew glanced up when she came in. One of them, a woman named Petra, who had been handing off to Ava for 3 years, held her gaze for a moment with an expression that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite caution and was something between them. Mathers was already in. She saw the light under his office door. She didn't go there first. She went to the nursing station and stood at the counter and looked at the board, the overnight admits, the current census, the particular geography of a department starting a day, and let herself feel what she felt about it, which was uncomplicated in a way very few things were. She was good here. Whatever else was true, she was good here, and the work was real, and the people who came through those doors needed it done correctly. "You're not supposed to be here," said Dr. Reyes from behind her. She turned. He was in scrubs, coffee in hand, looking at her with the measured expression that was becoming familiar. "Officially?" he added. "Officially," she agreed. "Is that changing?" "I believe so. Today, probably." He looked at her for a moment. "How's the patient from Bay 1? "Transferred successfully. Stable at last contact." He nodded. "The transport officer from surgery is in the ICU. Osei is cautiously optimistic, which from Osei means something." "Yeah." He drank his coffee. "It was a long night." "I know. Thank you for the work you did yesterday." He looked slightly surprised. "You did most of it." "We did most of it," she said. "That matters." He held her gaze for a moment with the expression of someone deciding something. Then, for what it's worth, whatever the administration situation is, the staff here know what happened yesterday. They know you were pulled for following protocol and then walked back in and saved someone's life in the same building that suspended you. He paused. People notice things, even when nobody says anything out loud. She looked at the board again. They always do, she said. The news about Sloan broke at 8:47 in the morning. She knew it had happened before she saw any news report because the quality of the air in the department shifted. The way it shifted when something moved through a community and people started receiving information on their phones simultaneously. She was sitting in the consultation room when she heard it from the hallway. A nurse saying something to another nurse. A name. A tone of surprise that was actually not surprise, but the specific sound of a thing you'd suspected being confirmed. She picked up her phone and found it. Callum City officer arrested on federal charges. Derek Sloan, a 17-year veteran of the Callum City Police Department, was taken into federal custody this morning on charges including obstruction of justice, disclosure of protected federal information, and conspiracy related to an ongoing federal investigation. The arrest follows a rapid development in a federal case connected to an incident on Route 9 yesterday morning. Sloan appeared before a federal magistrate at 8:15 a.m. He was not released on bail. 2 additional individuals were also arrested in connection with the same investigation. She read it twice. Set the phone face down on the table. Outside in the hallway, the sound of people processing. It wasn't a celebration. It was more complicated than that. 17 years. A uniform. A person who had occupied a position of authority in this community and had used it in ways that had been happening for a long time and had been buried for a long time. And the burying had required the cooperation of multiple systems that were supposed to prevent exactly that. People understood that, even when they didn't say it precisely. They understood that the arrest was not just about one man. It was about every system that had reviewed 7 complaints and written no action taken 7 times. At 9:15, Vasquez called. "I thought you'd want to know directly," she said. The scheduling coordinator, Ingrid Foss, the transit hub, was arrested at 7:50 this morning. The second transit node is expected within the next 12 hours. The federal cases are proceeding. What about Holt? A pause. Director Holt submitted his resignation to the hospital board at 8 this morning. The board accepted it. There will be an internal review of decisions made during his tenure. That review has been formally requested by the Federal Oversight Office. A brief pause. The request specifically cited the complaint process for nursing staff. Ava absorbed that. Delphine Marsh? A formal contact was made this morning by our victim liaison. She's been informed of all developments. She's been offered legal support through the federal process if she chooses to pursue the hospital's conduct during her time there. Will she? I don't know. That's her choice. Vasquez paused again. She did ask us to convey something to you. She said, "Tell her I knew someone would eventually." Ava sat with that for a moment. The weight of it, which was not light but wasn't heavy in the way bad things were heavy, more like the weight of something being set down correctly after a long time carried at the wrong angle. "Thank you," she said. "Miss Calloway?" Vasquez's voice shifted slightly. Not warmer exactly, but more direct. "Whatever comes next for you. It was good work yesterday. All of it." "For you too," Ava said, and meant it. Mathers called her into his office at 10. She expected the meeting, had been expecting it since she arrived. He'd let her be in the department for 3 hours before requesting it, which she read as a deliberate choice to give her time rather than pulling her into a room the moment she walked through the door, which was a different choice from the one he'd made yesterday morning, and she noticed it. She sat across from him. The desk between them was the same desk. The chair was the same chair. The light was the same institutional light. But the dynamic had shifted in a way that was not about the chair or the desk or the light. It was about what both of them now knew had happened in this room and outside it, and in a parking lot and in a trauma bay, and across a hospital corridor where federal agents had positioned themselves at both ends. "I've received communication from the hospital board," he said. "Holt's resignation is effective immediately. An interim director will be named by end of day. They've asked me to continue managing the department through the transition." He paused. "They've also asked me to extend, on behalf of the hospital, a formal reinstatement offer." "To me?" Yes. He held her gaze. With full back pay for the suspension period, a formal removal of the complaint from your record, and a written acknowledgement that your actions on the day in question were consistent with protocol and that the suspension was an administrative error. She looked at the desk. Error, she said. That's the language the board is using. The board wasn't here yesterday. They didn't see what an error looked like from the inside. She looked up. What language would you use? Mathers was quiet for a moment. I would use, he said carefully, a different word. One that meant we knew what we were doing and we did it anyway because it was easier than doing the right thing, and that has a cost, and the cost is owed. She held his gaze. That's more accurate. I know. He picked up the pen on his desk, which was his nervous habit, and set it down again. Whatever the board's language, Ava, what I'm saying to you is the accurate version. She looked at the window. The morning light had the particular clarity of a cold autumn day, everything sharp-edged and definite. I'm going to accept the reinstatement, she said. The terms are acceptable. Good. But I need something from the hospital, not from me, from the administration going forward. What? A formal review of the complaint process for clinical staff. Not an internal review, an external review with a reporting requirement to the board, and a mandate that any complaint filed by a staff member against an outside party, police, administration, donor relationships, goes to an independent reviewer, not through the department chain of command. She looked at him directly, because what happened to Delphine Marsh and what happened to me came from the same structural problem, and a new director doesn't fix that. A new process does. Mathers was quiet. She let it be quiet. I'll bring it to the interim board chair, he said. Today. It's not a request, she said. It's a condition of reinstatement. He looked at her for a long moment, not with the expression of someone being backed into a corner, with the expression of someone recognizing that the corner was exactly where it should be. Okay, he said. She stood. I'll take my badge back when the formal paperwork is ready. In the meantime, I have patience. She moved back into the department the way she always moved into the department, not with announcement, not with ceremony, just with the practical orientation of someone who understood what needed doing and where things were. She picked up a chart at the nursing station. She checked the overnight admits. She went to find the nurse she was covering and did a proper handoff, which took 12 minutes and left no gaps. The staff around her adjusted quickly. People were good at adjusting when the adjustment made sense. There were glances. She was aware of them. And she understood that to the people in this department, the last 24 hours had been a story with a shape they could follow. Nurse follows protocol. Nurse gets suspended. Nurse does the thing that saves a life anyway. The person who had her suspended turns out to have been compromised. The officer who put his hands on her in the parking lot turns out to have been arrested by federal agents this morning. Stories that shaped like that settled into people's understanding with a particular firmness. She didn't give a speech. She didn't make a statement. She went to Bay 4, where a 70-year-old man named Robert Pellegrino was sitting with elevated blood pressure and the contained anxiety of someone who'd been waiting too long without information, and she introduced herself and told him what she knew and what they were going to do about it, and the expression on his face when she finished was the thing she'd come back to this job for. Not the gratitude exactly, but the specific relief of a person who had been uncertain and afraid and was now in the hands of someone competent who had actually looked at them. That was the work. That was all the work was. It didn't need to be more than that. At 1 p.m, Petra appeared beside her at the nursing station with a paper cup. It's not terrible today, she said. I made it myself. Ava took the cup. Thank you. There's something you should see, Petra set her phone on the counter. On the screen was the comments section of a local news post about Sloane's arrest. Ava looked at it. Among the hundreds of comments, the expected range of reaction, people parsing what they knew and what they thought and what they felt about a system that had covered for someone for 17 years. There was a cluster that she followed with her eye. People identifying themselves as having had their own experiences. Not just with Sloane, with the pattern of him, the shape of what he'd been permitted to do by every layer that should have stopped it. There are a lot of them, Petra said quietly. There usually are, Ava said. When something like this finally comes out, it's never just one person. Does it help, knowing that? Ava looked at the screen for a moment. It helps that they're saying it now, that it's visible. She handed the phone back. I don't know if it helps them. I think it might, Petra said. I think being seen helps, even late. Ava picked up her coffee. Yeah, she said. I think so too. Nick. The call from the patient in Bay 1 came at 3:17 in the afternoon. Not through official channels. His personal phone to hers, which she would think about later. The fact that he had her number, that he'd had it all along. That the whole shape of the last 24 hours had been organized around information and positions and the specific way that people who operated in those contexts arranged the environment before they entered it. She took the call in the corridor. You went back, he said. I did. To the hospital. Yes. A brief pause. She could hear the difference in the background sound, the specific ambient quality of a federal medical facility, quieter and more controlled than Hargrove, with its own hum of equipment that was different from the civilian kind. How is it? She looked down the corridor. Reyes was at the board. Petra was moving toward Bay 2 with the particular pace that meant something needed attention but wasn't critical. The charge board had 8 patients, 2 pending discharge, 1 awaiting imaging results, 1 who needed a call to the family that Ava was going to make herself in about 20 minutes because no one else had yet. It's fine, she said. It's busy. You sound like yourself. That's because I'm somewhere I'm supposed to be. She paused. How are you doing? Rib is making itself known. His voice carried the dry quality of someone who'd decided pain was an acceptable cost of being alive. They keep trying to give me things for it. I keep telling them I want my head clear. Take the medication, she said. A clear head isn't worth anything if you're white-knuckling through the night and not sleeping. A sound that was nearly a laugh. Still difficult. Still accurate. She leaned against the wall. The arrest was made this morning. I saw. 2 more today as well. I know. A pause. The network is going to take time to fully dismantle. That's the reality. But the root is exposed now. That matters. It does. Another pause, longer this time. She could hear him thinking, or something like thinking, the quality of silence that preceded something deliberate. I want to ask you something, he said. All right. What decided it? The thing that made you decide last night. She looked at the corridor again. The board, the patients, the people moving through a department that was underperfunded and understaffed, and that had, yesterday, suspended a nurse for following protocol, and today was having her chart covered at one end while she took a call at the other end because she was the person who was supposed to be here, and everyone had adjusted back to that reality with minimal friction. Gerald Oakes, she said. A pause. The veteran. 62, dislocated shoulder, waited 6 hours without complaint. She paused. He was my first patient yesterday morning. He's why Sloan and I interacted in the first place. I followed protocol, Sloan didn't like it, and the whole day came from that one decision. She looked at the board. I drove home thinking about everything you said, about Merritt's offer, about what it all means going forward. And then I thought about Gerald Oakes, who needed a shoulder reduced and sat on a gurney for 6 hours because someone decided a donor relationship mattered more than the line. She paused. The people who made that call didn't think it was significant. They thought it was just administration. They thought there were no real consequences to getting it wrong. But there were. There always are, she said. People just don't usually see the chain clearly enough to connect them. She straightened from the wall. I came back to this department because the chain needs someone in it who pays attention to the Gerald Oakes of it. And I'm going to do the other work because it needs someone who understands that the rot doesn't just live in the big dramatic moments. It lives in the 9:42 phone call and the 7 complaints filed with no action taken and the donor who gets moved ahead of the veteran. She paused. Both things are the same problem from different angles. The corridor was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. They are. She could hear in the quality of those 2 words that this was what he'd wanted to know. Not whether she was capable or willing or strategically useful. He'd known all of that. He'd wanted to know if she understood why. If the reason was the right kind, the kind that didn't burn through itself under pressure because it came from something real rather than something reactive. Merritt's debrief is tomorrow, she said. I'll give him my answer formally then. I know. A pause. He'll be pleased. He can contain himself, she said dryly. Another almost laugh. Take the medication, sir, she said. Sleep. I'll see you when you're out of there. You will, he said, and she believed him and hung up. A sit. The formal arrest documentation on Sloan became public at 4 in the afternoon. Not just the initial charge announcement, the full filing, which the federal prosecutor's office released with the speed of people who wanted the record clear before the narrative could be constructed around it. Ava read it in the 20 minutes between finishing her call and needing to go back to work, standing at the nursing station with her phone, going through it carefully. The charges were specific: obstruction of justice, disclosure of protected operational information to a known criminal network, abuse of authority under color of law. That last one was its own paragraph, laid out in clear language that described a pattern of conduct over 6 years, with 7 documented incidents, in which a uniformed officer had used his position to intimidate and coerce civilians, with complaints that had been systematically reviewed and dismissed through a process that the filing described as having been compromised by undisclosed relationships between the officer and his reviewing supervisors. The supervisors were named, 2 of them. Both had been placed on administrative leave pending their own review. She read the section on Delphine Marsh. The filing referred to her by her initials, that's DM, and described the incident 4 years prior with the precise, effectless language of a legal document that was somehow more devastating for its lack of affect. The individual was a civilian healthcare worker. The officer made physical contact without consent. The individual filed a formal complaint. The complaint was reviewed. No action was taken. The individual subsequently left her employment. Each sentence its own short fact. Each fact its own indictment of the system that had produced it. At the bottom of the filing, in the section on witness cooperation, she found a line she hadn't expected. Multiple individuals have voluntarily provided testimony in support of this investigation. Their statements are held under seal and available to the court upon request. Multiple individuals. Not just the network members in custody, people who had direct knowledge of Sloan's conduct and had been willing to speak. She thought about the comments section Petra had shown her, the cluster of people identifying their own experiences. The specific shape of what emerged when something that had been covered was uncovered. Not just the primary case, but all the smaller things that had existed in its shadow, that had been made possible by the cover, that hadn't been talked about because the covering systems had been intact and people understood the cost of talking. When the cover came off, people talked. Not everyone, not immediately, but they talked. She set her phone down and went back to work. At 6 in the evening, 3 things happened in quick succession. The first, the hospital board's interim chair, a woman named Dr. Sandra Fry, who had been flown in from the Parent Health System's regional office and who moved through Hargrove Memorial with the brisk assessment of someone building a picture fast, stopped at the nursing station and introduced herself to Ava directly. They spoke for 7 minutes. At the end of it, Fry said, "The complaint review process change you proposed to Director Mathers. I've been briefed. It's being adopted as policy, effective with the formal start of my interim tenure. I'll need someone to sit on the implementation committee." Ava looked at her. "I can recommend several nurses," she said. "People who've been here long enough to know where the gaps are. I'd also like you on it. Then I'll be on it." Fry held her gaze for a moment with the appraisal of someone who had managed institutions for a long time and was good at reading people. "You know," she said, "when I read the sequence of events from yesterday, I kept coming back to the same point. You were suspended. You were in the parking lot. A federal team arrived and could have gone straight inside, straight to the ER, worked with whatever clinical staff were present, but they came to you. They knew my background." "Yes, but they didn't know your background from yesterday. They'd known your background for however long it took them to determine you were the right person for the situation." She paused. "Which means someone had already been paying attention. Someone already knew who you were and what you could do." She let that sit for a moment. "I think it's interesting that the hospital that employed you had not done the same." Ava held her gaze. "That's a structural problem," she said. not a personal one. I agree, Fry said, and I intend to change the structure. She extended her hand. It's good to have you back, Miss Calloway. Ava shook it. It's good to be back, she said, and found somewhat to her own surprise that it was true. The second thing, a message from Obi's number sent at 6:08, which read simply, "Third node confirmed. Arrest completed. The network has been neutralized. This phase of the investigation is closed." She read it standing in the corridor between Bay 3 and Bay 4 and felt something settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, because she was too practical for clean relief, too aware of the way things continued and mutated and resurfaced. But something like the satisfaction of watching a door lock properly, the mechanism working the way it was supposed to work. The third thing was smaller than the others, and somehow not smaller at all. She was charting at the nursing station at 6:20 when she heard the automatic doors and looked up out of habit. An older man came through, civilian clothes, right arm in a sling, moving a little carefully. He stopped just inside the entrance and looked around with the slightly uncertain expression of someone who'd been here before and was orienting himself to the context now that he was vertical and fully clothed. Gerald Oakes. He saw her at roughly the same moment she saw him, and something in his face shifted. Recognition, and something warmer than recognition. She came around the station. "Mr. Oakes," she said, "how's the shoulder?" "Sore," he said, "but back in place. That's something." He looked at her for a moment. "I heard some things today, about yesterday." "There was some activity here," she said carefully. "They said on the news." He stopped, looked at her directly. "The officer, Sloan." She held his gaze. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. The expression on his face was complicated. Not quite anger, not quite satisfaction, the specific texture of someone processing the understanding that a situation they'd experienced once had been happening to others for a long time. "He's the one who came in here yesterday," he said, "giving you trouble for following the process. He filed a complaint about how I handled his request, yes. And then he was arrested. For a different matter," she said. "But yes." Gerald Oakes looked at his shoes briefly and then back at her. "I was in the Army," he said, "long time ago. And the one thing I can tell you from that, the one thing that stuck, there are people in every system who protect the system even when the system is wrong, because the system is comfortable and familiar, and protecting it costs less than fixing it." He paused. "And then there are people who just do the right thing because it's the right thing, even when it costs." He held her gaze. "You were the second kind." She looked at him for a moment. The ER behind her was doing its early evening thing. The department picking up, the incoming cases beginning to arrive, the rhythm she'd been part of for 3 years shifting into the gear she knew best. "So were you," she said. He looked at her. "You came in here at 5 in the morning with a dislocated shoulder, and you waited 6 hours without complaint and you didn't ask for special treatment," she said. "And when I came to you first thing and told you what was going to happen, you trusted the process. That matters." She paused. "More than you know." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I just wanted to come back and say thank you, properly. They called me a car yesterday, which I appreciated, but it didn't feel like enough." "It was enough," she said. "You went home. That was the goal." A brief smile crossed his face, the first full one she'd seen from him. "You take care of yourself, Miss Calloway." "You too, Mr. Oakes." She paused. "Make sure the follow-up appointment happens. The shoulder needs physical therapy. Don't skip it because you feel better." He laughed, a real one, short and genuine. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and turned and walked out through the automatic doors into the evening. She watched him go. At 8:15, when her shift ended and the incoming charge nurse had been properly briefed and the board was current and the handoff was clean, she stood at the staff exit with her bag and looked at the door for a moment before she pushed through it. The parking lot was just a parking lot again. The black SUVs were gone. The cruiser was gone. The particular quality of yesterday's tension was gone, replaced by the ordinary sounds and lights of an evening changeover. Someone's headlights swinging across the asphalt, a car starting 2 rows over, A nurse she recognized heading to her own vehicle with the efficient walk of someone who had been on her feet for 12 hours and was thinking about dinner. She walked to her car, put her bag in the back seat, stood for a moment with the door open, looking at the building, the lit windows, the ER entrance with its automatic doors, the particular shape of a place that had been, for 3 years, more home than she'd wanted it to be. Tomorrow she would call Merritt and give him her formal answer, and he would tell her the details of the role, and she would listen carefully and ask the questions she'd been composing since she drove home in the dark last night. There would be things about it that were hard and things that were uncertain and things she couldn't know until she was inside them. That was true of every situation that mattered, but tonight was this. She thought about what the day had been. Not the federal case, not Sloan's arrest, not the board's policy change or Fry's handshake or Merritt's waiting. Just the day. Rhea's handing her coffee that was terrible. Petra making coffee that wasn't. Gerald Oakes coming back to say thank you properly. Robert Pellegrino in Bay 4 whose blood pressure had stabilized by noon and who had shaken her hand before he left with the slightly formal gratitude of a person who'd spent a long time not expecting to be looked at directly. She thought about Delphine Marsh, somewhere in a city she'd relocated to 4 years ago, having received a phone call this morning that told her it had not been forgotten. That the complaint she'd filed into what seemed like a void had been, in some form, retrieved. That the system had failed her, and someone in that system had noticed the failure and tried, even years late, to do something about it. Tell her I knew someone would eventually. She had known. That was the thing about people who did the right thing in systems that didn't want them to. They always knew somewhere in the place that was harder to reach than anger or defeat or the daily calculation of what it costs to keep showing up. They knew that what they'd done was real and right, and had happened, regardless of what the official record said. The official record could be buried, revised, ignored. But the thing itself, the action taken in the moment when it could have been easier not to, that didn't go away. Systems tried to tell people otherwise. They were structured, often, around exactly that lie. That individual action was insignificant, that the institutional record was the only record that counted, that being right in a room full of people who needed you to be wrong was a kind of defeat. It wasn't. What it was slow. What it was costly. What it was, sometimes, was a long wait in a parking lot and a bruise on your arm, and the weight of 7 complaints written in a row on a page, and the name of a woman who had left a hospital and a city and rebuilt somewhere else. It was imperfect and unglamorous, and it didn't resolve in a single day, even when a single day held more resolution than most. But it was real, and it accrued. Action after action after action, by person after person, in the small moments and the large ones, in the protocol followed when it was inconvenient, and the chart logged when no one was watching, and the complaint filed into what felt like a void. It accrued into something that eventually a federal camera caught and a federal case documented and a federal charge sheet named with the specific, effectless clarity of a record that could not now be buried. Ava Calloway had not changed the world yesterday. She knew that. She hadn't arrived as a savior, and she hadn't left as one. She had followed protocol. She had been punished for following protocol. She had done the work she knew how to do in a room where it was needed. She had stayed still in a parking lot because she understood that losing her composure there was less important than what was coming. And she had been seen. Not because she'd tried to be, because she'd been there doing the actual thing, and the people whose job it was to see had eventually looked. That was the only lesson she had that felt true enough to keep. Not that justice was inevitable, she'd seen too much to believe that. Not that doing right protected you. She had the bruise on her arm and 3 years of distance from a classified record to know otherwise. Just that what you actually did in the actual moment was real and stayed real, and that reality had weight, and weight over time moved things. She got in the car, started the engine. The radio came on automatically, something low and instrumental she'd left on from the last time she'd driven. And she didn't change it. She sat for one more moment in the parking lot of Hargrove Memorial, watching the lit entrance, listening to the music, breathing in the cold air from the heater just starting to run. Then she put the car in reverse and drove out into the city, and the evening opened up ahead of her. Not finished, not resolved into perfect clarity, not clean at all the edges, but hers. Entirely, rightly hers. Hers to navigate with the particular skill of a person who knew how to move through hard things without losing the thread of why she was moving. That was enough. That was, in the end, everything.